A billionaire walked into a small diner, never knowing that within minutes her entire world would shatter. A tiny pendant glinting under the lights, and a buried truth exploded into reality. The daughter she lost 20 years ago was standing right there, serving her coffee. How could one simple piece of jewelry unravel a secret hidden for decades? Stay, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Margaret Whitmore was a name that echoed power and wealth, but those who knew her personally understood the lonely shadow that followed her. A widow in her 60s, Margaret had built an empire that spanned continents, but her billions couldn't buy back the one thing she yearned for the most: her daughter, Sophie. 20 years ago, Sophie had vanished from a sunny park in California, leaving Margaret with nothing but unanswered questions and sleepless nights. Despite countless searches, private investigators, and endless tears, Sophie was never found. Over time, Margaret had learned to live with the pain, or at least tuck it away behind the polished veneer of her public life. But she never stopped looking. Every child she saw, every laugh she heard, reminded her of the giggles she had lost. After years of running away from California, the place that had stolen her joy, Margaret finally returned. Something about being back felt right, as if her heart had unfinished business with the place. That afternoon, Margaret decided to skip her usual fine dining experiences. She craved something simple, something human. Driving aimlessly through the streets of her new town, her eyes landed on a charming little diner with a bright red sign that read, "Sunny." The place was buzzing with life, filled with families, friends, and the comforting hum of ordinary conversations. As Margaret walked in, a bell above the door chimed, announcing her arrival. She chose a corner booth, one that gave her a view of the room but still offered some privacy. The waitress approached shortly after, a young woman in her 20s, her uniform slightly wrinkled but clean, her smile genuine yet faintly weary. "Good afternoon, ma'am," she greeted, holding a notepad and pen. "What can I get started for you?" Margaret looked up, and for a brief moment she was struck by something she couldn't quite place. There was a familiarity in the waitress's soft brown eyes, something that tugged at a corner of her memory. "Just coffee for now, thank you," Margaret said, keeping her voice steady. The waitress nodded, "Coming right up." Margaret leaned back, watching her move gracefully between tables, chatting kindly with customers. Her demeanor was warm, yet carried a hint of something Margaret recognized all too well: resilience. When the waitress returned with her coffee, Margaret noticed a small gold locket glinting under the diner's fluorescent lights. It was delicate, with intricate floral designs etched into its surface. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. "That's a beautiful locket," she said, her voice softer now. The waitress instinctively touched the locket. "Thank you, it's very special to me." Margaret leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "If you don't mind me asking, where did you get it?" The waitress smiled faintly. "It was a birthday gift from my mom when I was really young. I don't remember much about her because I grew up in foster care, but this is the one thing I've always had of hers." Margaret's world seemed to tilt. Foster care. Her mind raced. Could it be possible? As the waitress walked away to tend to other customers, Margaret reached into her purse, her hands trembling. She pulled out a photograph she had carried for years. It was worn and slightly faded, but the image was still clear. Margaret and Sophie on her daughter's 5th birthday. Sophie holding a tiny locket identical to the one the waitress wore. When the waitress returned with Margaret's order, Margaret couldn't hold back any longer. "I know this might sound odd, but could you sit for a moment?" The waitress looked hesitant, but nodded, sliding into the booth across from Margaret. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" Margaret slid the photo across the table. "Do you recognize this?" The waitress picked up the picture, her brow furrowing. Her fingers brushed against the locket in the photo, identical to the one around her neck. Her eyes widened, darting between the image and Margaret. This little girl looks just like me when I was young," she whispered. Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. "That's because it is you," she said, her voice breaking. You're my daughter. My Sophie." The waitress's hand flew to her mouth, her breath hitching. "No, that can't be. My name is Sophie. I don't have a family." Margaret reached out, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and heartbreak. "Sophie was your nickname. I called you that all the time when you were a little girl." Sophie sat frozen, her mind racing. How could this be possible? My foster mom, she said. My real parents abandoned me." Margaret shook her head vehemently. "I never abandoned you. You were taken from me. I spent my entire life looking for you." Sophie's eyes filled with tears as she clutched the locket around her neck. I don't know what to say." Margaret slid out of the booth, her arms open. "You don't have to say anything. Just let me hold you, my Sophie." Sophie hesitated for a moment, then broke down, throwing her arms around Margaret. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, my darling," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "It's me, and I'm never letting you go again." What happens when two hearts torn apart by time try to reconnect amidst years of pain and unanswered questions? Sophie couldn't stop staring at Margaret, her newly discovered mother, the photo still trembling in her hands as she processed the impossible truth. She wanted to believe it, her heart ached to, but doubts lingered in her mind. Could this woman, this billionaire, truly be her mother? Margaret wiped her tears with a trembling hand. Sophie, I know this is overwhelming, but I promise you it's the truth. Every day for the past 20 years I prayed for this moment. I've imagined your face, your voice, your smile, but nothing compares to seeing you here alive." A look of high emotion crossed Sophie's face, a tangled web of disbelief and longing. "It's hard to believe, you know. My whole life I was—" Her voice cracked. "And now you're telling me you've been searching for me all this time?" Margaret reached across the table, gently holding Sophie's hand. "I never stopped looking. You were taken from me, ripped from my life in a way I couldn't understand. I hired the best detectives, I offered endless rewards, but it was like you vanished into thin air. And now to find you here—" Her voice broke again, tears spilling over her cheeks. Sophie's mind raced back to her childhood. She had faint memories of a warm home, a garden she used to play in, and the scent of roses that lingered in the air. But those memories were overshadowed by the years she spent moving from one foster home to another, each one colder than the last. "I grew up thinking I was abandoned," Sophie said quietly. "The foster system wasn't kind to me. I learned early on not to expect much from anyone. I got my first job as a waitress when I was 16. I've been working ever since, just trying to survive." Margaret's heart shattered as she listened. "I can't imagine the pain you went through. If I had known, if I had found you sooner—" She paused, her voice thick with regret. "None of this would have happened. You would have had the life you deserved." Sophie looked at Margaret, her eyes searching. "Why now, after all these years? Why did fate bring us together today?" Margaret touched the locket around Sophie's neck. "Because of this," she said softly. "It's the one thing that tied us together even when we were apart. It's what brought me here today." The room fell silent as Sophie absorbed Margaret's words. Finally, she asked the question burning in her heart, "What about my dad? Where is he?" Margaret's expression darkened with sorrow. "Your father passed away a few years after we lost you. He couldn't handle the grief. He blamed himself for not protecting you that day." Sophie's breath hitched. "I wish I could have met him," she whispered. Margaret nodded, tears falling freely now. "He would have loved you so much, Sophie. You were his whole world, just like you were mine." Sophie reached across the table, her hand trembling, and placed it over Margaret's. "I don't know how to feel," she said, "but I think I want to try. I want to know what it's like to have a mom." Margaret broke into a soft, tearful smile. "And I want to know what it's like to be your mom again. Let me make up for the years we lost, Sophie. Let me give you everything I couldn't before." Margaret insisted Sophie leave the diner with her. "You're not staying here another day," she said firmly. I have a home for you, a real home." Sophie hesitated. "I don't need charity, and I don't want your money. I just want to feel like I belong somewhere." Margaret smiled gently. "You belong with me. And this isn't about money, Sophie. This is about family. Please, let me give you the life you deserve." Sophie reluctantly agreed, and they drove to Margaret's sprawling estate. The mansion was breathtaking, with lush gardens, sparkling fountains, and a warmth Sophie hadn't expected from such an enormous home. "This is where I imagined you playing," Margaret said, her voice soft. "Every flower, every corner of this place reminded me of you. I used to sit by the fountain and dream of the day you'd come back to me." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful," she said, "but it doesn't feel like mine yet." Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder. "It will. One day it will." Over the next few weeks, Margaret and Sophie began rebuilding their relationship. They shared stories, laughter, and even tears as they pieced together the puzzle of their lives. One afternoon, Margaret showed Sophie an old photo album filled with memories of her childhood. "This was your favorite dress," she said, pointing to a picture of Sophie in a bright yellow sundress. "You wore it every chance you got." Sophie smiled faintly. "I think I remember that," she said. "I remember you brushing my hair and singing to me." Margaret's heart swelled. "And I'll do it again, if you'll let me," she said, with a soft laugh. But not everything was easy. Sophie struggled to adjust to the idea of wealth and luxury. "I'm not used to being cared for," she admitted one evening. "I spent so long taking care of myself, it feels strange to let someone else do it." Margaret took her hand. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," she said. "You're not alone, Sophie. You never will be again." One day, as they sat by the fountain in the garden, Sophie turned to Margaret. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "why didn't you give up on me? Most people would have." Margaret smiled through her tears. "Because a mother's love doesn't give up. It doesn't fade, and it doesn't forget. I knew deep in my soul that you were out there somewhere, and now that I've found you, I'll never let you go again." Sophie leaned into her mother's embrace, her heart full for the first time in years. "Thank you," she whispered, "for never giving up on me." Margaret kissed her forehead. "You're my miracle, Sophie, my second chance. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you're loved." As they sat together, the sun setting behind them, both mother and daughter knew that their broken pieces were finally being mended. The years they had lost would never come back, but the future was theirs to create. A future filled with love, hope, and the bond that nothing could ever break. Could love truly heal wounds time had torn open? For Margaret and Sophie, the answer was written in the way their hearts found their way back to one another.